I always thought being a father was a matter of presence, of being there, solid, standing tall, like a tree that doesn't bend in the wind. I thought kids needed an example, discipline, a path laid out with rigor, not long hugs or conversations that made me feel uncomfortable. Omaha, Nebraska taught me that, or at least that's what I chose to believe for most of my life. A city that grows, that works, that never stops, and I was exactly like that. Richard Miller, 74 years old, a man of his word, a man of results, or so I thought. I was born here, grew up here, got married here. Beatrice came into my life when I was 25 at a 4th of July block party in the Dundee neighborhood. She had her hair in a braid and a laugh that could make the world stand still. I fell in love before I even knew her name. In the 49 years that followed, she was the heart of our marriage, the part that felt, that comforted, that healed. I was the structure, or at least that's how I justified my coldness. Daniel was born first, in March of 1979, a boy who loved to draw and spent hours inventing stories with any piece of paper he could find. I'd look at that and think he needed to learn more serious things. So I'd push the paper aside and say it was time to study. He'd obey me, he always did. But there was something in his eyes that I chose not to see for far too long. Mariana arrived 3 years later in July. She was different from Daniel, louder, more intense, with an energy that filled any room. I liked that about her, but I never knew how to show it. The most I ever did was a nod when she got an A+, or a look of approval when she won some award at school. It was enough, I told myself. Kids need to learn that the world doesn't applaud every step they take. I was present at every graduation, every sporting event, every parent-teacher conference. I'd sit in the front row and leave with my chest puffed out whenever a teacher said my kids were dedicated. I saw that as proof I was doing it right. I didn't understand that physical presence and emotional presence are completely different things. I didn't understand because I'd never bothered to learn the difference. I remember one Wednesday afternoon, back when Daniel was about 14. He came home from school looking downcast, his uniform covered in dirt and his eyes red. He sat at the kitchen table and was quiet. Beatrice went over to him and asked softly what had happened. He said some boys had played a mean prank on him during recess, that they called him names, that they threw his stuff around. Beatrice hugged him. I was in the living room, I heard everything, and I walked into the kitchen with that firm voice I thought solved problems. I told him that's just how the world is, that men don't cry over stupid things, that he needed to learn to defend himself, that I'd been through worse and I'd handled it. Daniel wiped his face with the back of his hand and said he was fine, and I went back to the living room, satisfied, thinking I'd given him the right guidance. Only decades later did I understand that what he needed in that moment wasn't a lesson, it was his dad. It was no different with Mariana. She was 16 when she came to me one night after dinner and said she was feeling ugly, that the girls at school had a way of dressing and acting that she couldn't keep up with. She was hoping I'd say something to comfort her. Instead, I looked at her and said she didn't need to go fishing for compliments, that it was just teenage drama and she should focus on her studies. She stared at me for a second, as if waiting for me to say something more. Then she lowered her head and went to her room. I convinced myself I'd been honest, that this was my job, that kids needed the truth, not coddling. Mariana's wedding took place on a May afternoon at a simple country venue on the road out to Papillion. She chose everything with such care: wildflowers, tables with linen tablecloths, a band playing soft folk rock during dinner. Her fiancé, Tyler, was a quiet man of few words who looked at her with a tenderness I recognized from a distance as something real. When it was time for the speeches, Mariana took the microphone with both hands and began to speak. She thanked her mother first. She said Beatrice was the person who had taught her how to feel safe in the world, that her mom had a gift for turning any difficult conversation into a moment of comfort, and that she would carry that example with her forever. People applauded, and Beatrice cried with that beautiful smile I'd known for so long. Then Mariana looked at me, and what I saw in her eyes wasn't anger. It was something much harder to bear. It was a kind of old, settled weariness. She smiled and said her father had taught her many things: discipline, responsibility, the value of hard work. She said she respected that. But she also said in that same calm voice that for most of her childhood she never felt comfortable enough to tell her father about her insecurities or her fears. That he was always there, but that somehow she felt she couldn't be vulnerable around him. That she grew up with the certainty that love, his version of it, came with conditions. She didn't say it with malice. She said it like someone finally able to name something she'd carried for years without fully understanding it. The people around us were silent for a second, and then the applause came again, more delicate this time. Tyler hugged her. I just sat there with a glass of iced tea in my hand and felt something I had never felt before with such intensity: the absolute clarity that I had been wrong. Throughout the reception, my mind was flooded with thoughts I couldn't organize. The memories came back one after another, as if they had been waiting for this moment to all appear at once. The day Daniel cried and I told him to suck it up. The night Mariana came to me feeling insecure and I dismissed her with coldness. The dozens of conversations that could have happened, that I had shut down before they even began. I was there for all of them, and at the same time, I was there for none of them. Beatrice stayed by my side during dinner and didn't say a word, but at some point she placed her hand on mine and squeezed it with a firmness I understood. She knew. She had always known. And for years she had tried to make up for what I couldn't offer. That night, watching my daughter dance with her husband in the middle of that venue lit by string lights, I asked myself a question that would never stop echoing inside me. Was there still time, at 74, to be a different kind of father? The night after the wedding, I went to find Mariana. She was in the room at the venue they'd rented for guests to stay over, sitting on the edge of the bed taking off her earrings. I knocked softly on the door, and she told me to come in. When she saw me, she didn't look surprised. It was as if she already knew this conversation would have to happen sooner or later. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. We'll be right back. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. I sat in a chair near the window and for a moment didn't know where to begin. I thought of all the things I could say. I thought about justifying myself, explaining that the times were different when I raised my kids, that men of my generation weren't taught to express what they felt, that my own father had been even stricter than I was. But all those words, which I had mentally rehearsed during the entire reception, suddenly seemed too small for the moment. So I said what I probably should have said decades ago. I said I had heard everything she said, that I wanted to understand better, that I wasn't there to defend myself. She looked at me for a long second before answering. She said that whenever she tried to be honest with her father, she felt like she was being corrected before she could even finish her sentence, that she learned early on that around me it was easier to seem strong than to be real, that she grew up believing that what she accomplished mattered far more to me than who she was, and that it had left a mark she still carried, even at 42, even happy, even married to a man who loved her well. I didn't interrupt. I didn't try to explain or justify. For the first time in my life, I stayed quiet and let my daughter's words reach me, whole and unfiltered. And it hurt. It hurt in a way I didn't know was possible. It wasn't the pain of being attacked. It was the pain of finally seeing what you'd refused to see for so long. Before I left the room, I said I was sorry, that the regret I carried was genuine, and that I intended to do things differently, even though I knew the past couldn't be erased. She was silent for a moment, and then said something that has stayed with me forever. She said she didn't need me to be perfect. She needed me to be honest, and that this conversation, right then, was a start. I went back to Omaha a different man. I don't know if anyone noticed on the outside, but inside it was as if something had been rearranged. I started to try, not in the over-the-top way of someone trying to make up for everything at once, because I knew that would be just another form of selfishness. I tried slowly, in a way that felt true. When Daniel called to talk about problems at work, I would stop what I was doing. I'd turn off the TV, I'd sit down, and I'd listen. Not with the haste of someone formulating a solution while the other person is still talking, but with the attention of someone who is truly present. Sometimes it was hard. The urge to give a canned response, to end the topic with a catchphrase, still came up. But I would take a deep breath and let Daniel finish. I'd ask how he was feeling, not what he was planning to do. In the first few months, the conversations were still a bit tense. Daniel was used to the father who solved things, not the father who listened, and it took him a while to adjust to this new version of me. I understood. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. It's rebuilt in a series of small moments that accumulate until the person on the other side starts to believe the change is real. Beatrice watched it all closely. One night after the kids had gone to bed, she stayed with me on the porch and said she saw me trying. She said it was beautiful. And then, with that quiet honesty that always defined her, she also said that for years she had carried the role of our children's emotional safety net all by herself, that she had compensated for my emotional absence in a way that spared me from facing what I needed to face. She said she didn't hold a grudge, but that she needed me to know. That she, too, had often felt alone in our marriage, even after nearly 5 decades together. That hit me in a way that Mariana's speech, as powerful as it was, hadn't managed to. Because Beatrice was the one I had chosen, the one I thought I had protected, the one I thought I understood so well. And discovering that she also held a loneliness that I had created was the heaviest part of this whole journey. That night, for the first time in decades, we really talked. Not about the kids, not about the house, not about practical plans. We talked about us, about what we had been to each other, about what we could still be. She cried. I cried too, which never came easily to me. And when the silence returned, it was different from the silence before. It was a silence that breathed. The turning point I never expected came on a Thursday with no special occasion. I was 74, my hair all white, and I was sitting on the porch with a coffee that had already gone cold when the phone rang. It was Daniel. It wasn't anyone's birthday. There was no emergency. He just called to talk. He said he was thinking about quitting his job, that the company had taken a direction he could no longer support, that he felt he was wasting his best years in a place that didn't value him, that he was lost, unsure if he should take the risk or stay in something that was suffocating him. And then he said something I never expected to hear. He said he wanted to know what I thought, not what I would order him to do, but what I thought. That he wanted my opinion as a father, not as a boss. I held the phone with both hands and thought before I answered. And what I said was that I didn't have the right answer for that he knew his own life much better than I ever could, and that whatever choice he made, I would be there to support him. I said that what I saw in him was a 45-year-old man who had built so much through hard work, and that the clarity he felt about what no longer made him happy was a kind of courage that deserved respect. There was a long pause on the other end, and then Daniel said thank you. He said thank you for listening. And before he hung up, he revealed that he had almost not called, that he'd been hesitant, that it was Beatrice who had encouraged him to give his dad a chance because she had noticed I was really trying. When the call ended, I stood on the porch for a long time. The coffee was cold, the street was quiet, and my eyes were full of something it took me a moment to identify. It was gratitude. Gratitude for still being alive to experience that moment. For having a wife who, after everything, had still bet on me. For having children who, even after so many years of emotional distance, still opened a crack of possibility. I can't go back. I can't give Daniel back the afternoon he cried and I told him to suck it up. I can't sit next to a teenage Mariana again and say the words that should have been said. The past stays where it is, and I've learned to carry that weight without letting it destroy me. What I can do is what I'm doing now, with every call, every visit, every Sunday dinner when the table is full, and I look at my children and think about how much they've taught me about what it means to be truly human. Beatrice says she sees me differently. Daniel has started calling more often. Mariana comes over with Tyler on Sundays and sometimes stays until late afternoon, talking with me on the porch. They're small things, but they're the things that matter most. I'm not the father I should have been, but I'm becoming the father I can still be. And I've discovered later than I would have liked, but not too late, that rebuilding broken bridges doesn't require grand gestures. It just requires honesty, patience, and the willingness to show up, this time for real.